Hey there, I'm Snowpoke, and I really like Splatoon. But that doesn't mean that I don't see any issues in the game that Nintendo might want to address in the future. I also haven't really seen a lot of people talk about what they imagine a future Splatoon 3 game to look like. And since Nintendo is probably just getting started on the development of that game, this could be the crucial time where they might actually listen to us. So I thought, well, let me just write down my ideas and then we can talk about it in the community. And at least I made my voice heard. Well, 25 pages of script writing later, I realized I really have a lot of ideas. And what ensued was the biggest video project that I have ever worked on. Snowpoke, when's the Splatoon 3 video gonna come out? Has been a meme in my channel for an entire year by now. And honestly, considering how many times I've been reworking this video over and over again, I'm not even sure if what I'm recording right now is ever gonna see the light of day. Anyways, I am trying to come up with creative and somewhat novel ideas or solutions to issues that Splatoon is facing. And I know they might seem odd at first, but I would appreciate it if you could hear me out. Let's get started. While making my Splatoon 1 versus Splatoon 2 review video, I had a lot of conversations with my viewers. And what stuck out to me was that they actually really liked the craziness of Splatoon 1. Like, they didn't care whether it was balanced or not. Popping a Kraken when they were in a pinch, it was just a jolly good time. Similarly, I feel like that's why videos of people cheating in Splatoon, why those are so popular. I think people just kind of wish they had those superpowers that those cheaters have. So why not give players those superpowers? I suggest we pull a Mario Kart and we add items or power-ups to Splatoon. And so people could have absurd swimming speed or just overpowered specials. This also alleviates one issue that many Turf War matches exhibit, which is their massive imbalance. It is so common for Turf War matches for there to be disconnects or players doing anything other than actually playing the game. Or sometimes there's just that one super strong player who is messing up the balance of the entire match. If you added items, you could tweak the balance by making the items that are given to the disadvantaged team just a tiny little bit stronger. You know, that would make the game so much more enjoyable to both sides. This could also make the casual rank mode viable that I know some people are hoping for. Basically, what many people want is an option to play ranked modes, but without actually being assigned a rank. Having that rank following you that changes with every match you play, it causes a lot of stress for many players. And sometimes, even competitive players, they just want to play Splatoon without the burden of having to do their very best at every single moment. However, I've personally always been wary of the idea of introducing a casual ranked mode, since I'm scared it might just dilute the player base of the normal ranked mode, but without actually adding any better experience. I'm also a bit scared that many of my more sensitive friends would just switch to casual rank to not be too stressed out by the competitiveness in X rank. And I'd just be all alone stuck with a bunch of hyper-competitive and maybe even toxic people. Having fewer players would probably also make for even more unbalanced lobbies than what I'm already dealing with, and in ranked mode that can quickly destroy any fun you're having in the game. However, if there was a casual ranked mode that had items, both of those issues would be fixed. For one, people who enjoy the ranked game modes, they would still be playing standard ranked Splatoon for the most, since ranked modes with items would be a substantially different experience. Instead, I expect players that would usually stay in Turf War to be more open to try out casual rank. And it could also keep some players in Splatoon that would have otherwise switched to another game altogether. That said, players in competitive rank that are exhausted after losing a lot of matches, they can also wind down a little bit in a casual rank mode where they can go wild with items and nothing really matters. While writing this script, I've also gotten another feedback about Turf War. Many players would like there to be an easier way to play together with their friends. I'm not sure how viable that would be from a technical standpoint, but it would be great if, besides the option of joining a friend, you could also group up beforehand and then play together. You know, kind of like in Salmon Run. I have to admit, I'm a bit worried that giving players such an option might make it more likely that groups of people would group up and have squid parties in Turf War. However, this problem already exists with the current system, and I think a better approach to curbing the number of squid parties would be to have a specific squid party option when you report a player within the Nintendo Switch Online app. Many players are quite annoyed by squid parties in Turf War or even in Ranked, and so if Nintendo encouraged reporting those players, I think that would make its word around the community fairly quickly. A problem that I've heard about from friends so many times is how intimidated people are by Ranked Splatoon. I have a lot of friends that thoroughly enjoy Ranked over Turf War, but some of them, they didn't even get into Ranked until they were level 80 or so. They were just very intimidated by the idea of ranked matches. And, I worry about how many people are missing out on the full Splatoon experience because of that. Another issue that many players face is the confusion of suddenly being thrown into an entirely new mode. Especially if that mode is Clam Blitz. Now, I love Clam Blitz actually, but I think we can all agree that it's a little bit confusing for new players to get into. I actually really like Splatoon's approach of just having people play instead of making them go through a lengthy tutorial. But I think it would be nice if that introduction could just be a little bit more gentle. To make this happen, I propose that C rank and B rank are scrapped in favor of so-called starter ranks. I'm imagining 4 starter ranks for the player to traverse in order, appropriately named Starter 1 through Starter 4. In Starter 1, you always play Splat Zones. Starter 2 always has tower control. Starter 3 will be Rainmaker every time. And finally, in Starter 4, you will always play Clam Blitz. Only after the player has made it through those 4 starter ranks, they gain access to normal ranked mode, and also to the casual ranked mode that I mentioned earlier. Furthermore, players in those starter ranks will get assistance. For one, the game could point out to players where the objective is, but maybe there would even be a commentator in text boxes. And they could call out important things that are happening to the objective, and why they happened. Imagine things like, the opponents just took back the zone. Look at their timer running down. Or, our home team is doing really well, but can they keep it until the timer runs to 0? Another aspect where I'd love to see some changes would be with X rank. At least in the Western community, we have huge issues getting into balanced matches. No matter how low my X rank is, I regularly get paired with the strongest players in the entire world. And it wouldn't be as bad if both teams had one of those super strong players. But oftentimes, there's only one very strong player in the lobby. So, as a result of that, the outcome of the match is entirely predetermined by which team that player is assigned to. If you watch one of those super strong players' Twitch streams, you can actually see how most of their matches, they give them near to 0 X-rank points due to the massive imbalance. It has gotten to the point where some high-level players have become desperate and created their own Discord servers, where they try to perform their own solo queue-style matchmaking, but only with a very limited list of allowed players. They're called +1 and +2, and to become a member of one of those servers, you have to be voted into them by the existing constituents. You also have to prove that you're worth staying in the server every month. And if you think that that kind of thing causes a lot of drama, then, well, you're absolutely correct. Honestly, sometimes I'm glad I'm not too good at the game. Being really good at Splatoon seems like no fun at all. I understand that the experience of those 1% of players that make up X rank is not the top priority for the development team. And honestly, I think it shouldn't be. But it is unfortunate that those enthusiastic players don't have as great a time as they could have. And even as a medium-strength player, being put into a balanced lobby in X rank still feels like a rare and special event to me. Okay, so what do we do about this? From many people in the community, I hear that they would like X rank to be smaller. And while there are probably some more elegant approaches, I actually agree with that idea. I feel bad for playing into the elitism that some people have, but I really think a smaller X rank is worth considering. X rank, it's supposed to be the rank where the strongest players meet. And for me, that means it should be as large as necessary to make its matchmaking functional, but within that constraint, as small as possible. I've actually had the experience that in the current X rank, the matchmaking is among the fastest in the entire game. And that's despite the lower number of players. Because, it turns out people in X rank, they play this game a lot. So there are probably way more than enough players for matchmaking to be functional at the moment. So I think we can thin it out a little bit. Speaking of rather blunt methods, if I'm not mistaken, and I am a mathematician and I did read the paper on Splatoon's matchmaking system, so I'm not entirely pulling this out of my nose. But well, if I'm not mistaken, the matchmaking algorithm assigns to each team a probability of winning the match based on the team's average power. -0 or +0 matches, they can happen if the algorithm assigns to one of the teams a winning chance of less than 4%. I'd like there to be a hard cap on that. I was a little bit worried about getting my math wrong in front of people, so I sketched a quick proof of what I just said, of the numbers and everything. Feel free to pause the video if you feel like it. If all players are in a lobby and the matchmaking system finds out the winning chance for one of the teams is less than 4%, then just don't let it play out. Maybe there's a way to rearrange the players for the game to be more balanced. And I do assume there needs to be some imperfection and randomness to make the rank estimation work, but at the moment, it's just too much. Especially since in most of the cases where you do lose a match that you were supposed to win with a 96% chance, it's usually due to factors that are out of your control, which is kind of frustrating, And the few times that I did win a match with a winning chance of less than 4%, that's usually just because there's a disconnect in the opponent's team. So at the end, you're kind of just cheating the system there. But I think there are more ways to help us get a better experience. For one, players that make it to X-Rank in Splatoon, they usually have a more stable internet connection anyways. So maybe we could be put into those coveted Japanese lobbies just a little bit more often. Oh, and yes, I do also have some ideas on how to make disconnects less often. But we're going to get to that later on in the video. I also have this other idea that's maybe a little bit unusual, but hear me out. Looking at the team pairings in X-Rank ever since the 4.3.1 patch, clearly the matchmaking places a high priority on the weapon balance between the teams, and the weapon ranges in particular. If the matchmaking algorithm didn't carry the burden of having to ensure weapon balance, it could instead focus a bit more on power balance. So how about we give players the option of creating a second alternative weapon and gear kit? The matchmaking itself could then be purely based on the team powers, but after the matchmaking is done, the algorithm could choose which of the previously selected weapons the players will be using to ensure weapon balance. Since we're talking ranked gameplay anyways, let's also talk about the modes. Overall, I really enjoy my time with them, and I think they're really well designed. But of course, there's always some room for improvement. Whenever I talk about the rank modes in my chat, there are always people who have a few grievances, and the points they make, they're actually fairly consistent among viewers. And well, to be fair, I don't really have that many ideas on how to improve these things. And of course, however a mode is designed, people will have their preferences. But I do think that with every iteration of the game, the development team should think about how to design the modes and whether there are redesigns that might be a good idea. So let's talk about the gripes that people have with the modes. First, let's start with the classic, Splat zones. From people who don't enjoy zones that much, I oftentimes hear it referred to as if spawn camping was a competitive mode. Splat zones, with its immobile objective, it puts a very strong emphasis on locking out the enemy team and on taking out the enemies before they can get close to the objective. Since the controlling team has so much control over the map, they become vastly stronger than they would be in a fair interaction, which then forces the attack team to unite all their attacks and specials. They just have to do anything possible to break through the enemy's barrage. And sometimes that just doesn't work out. Especially since the timer in Splat zones just runs down so incredibly quickly. And you might be able to hear between the lines, I've recently been a bit frustrated by that too. Besides slowing down the timer, I think one way to naturally slow things down a little bit and to give the disadvantaged team a bit more time to recollect would be if more maps had double zones. I have to say, I personally find double zones quite enjoyable, but I know that's a little bit of a controversial take. I think what zones and Rainmaker share is how the first interactions can have a huge impact on the rest of the game, and how they might even cause decisive KOs between teams that would otherwise be equal. Though I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing. I personally, at least, I really enjoy the rapid nature of Rainmaker. But I can see how for other players, events like those can be really frustrating. For people who don't enjoy Rainmaker that much, that's exactly the complaint they're voicing. They report experiences where an unlucky start of the game can lead to huge Rainmaker pushes that just make the rest of the game feel entirely irrelevant in comparison. In general, I would say Rainmaker is a mode where small infractions can have huge consequences. In tower control, those players who don't enjoy it are mostly people that are frustrated by teammates not stepping on the tower. When I started creating this video months ago, back when I was still a young lass, I considered tower control the weakest mode. And thinking about it, I still kinda do. Because oftentimes, being on the tower is just not that much fun. In the end, tower control, it revolves a lot about hunting down opponents all over the map in order to get into a position where you have more players on the field than the opponents have, so you can somewhat safely move the tower. Basically, it actually gets fairly close to a deathmatch sometimes. In contrast, sitting on the tower, waiting to be splattered, it's just not as enjoyable, and I think that's why regularly in solo queue, you just don't see anybody stepping on the tower. You know, they just have more fun stuff to do. That said, that's just my take. It also depends on which weapon you play, for example. And I personally still enjoy playing tower control a lot. Lastly, clams. Clams, you know, it's a weird case. It's gotten kind of popular to hate on clamblets. So when I hear people complain about clams, I'm not always sure how much of that would actually happen if people weren't exposed to those opinions before. I feel like clams is kind of like the new kid in class, and it's just still struggling a bit. That said, issues that I hear reported a lot about clamblets are that it's really hard to understand for new players, and then also that the lack of communication in solo queue makes it a little bit more difficult. This time, I actually do have a few improvement ideas though. First of all, I think the starter rank system that I explained at the start of the video, that might go a long way in helping ease in players to the mode of clamblets. Furthermore, there's this oddity in clamblets that you can throw clams not only with the A button, but also with the L button, which is a feature that hardly anybody even knows about. So how about we map a more useful feature onto the L button? I would suggest that when you press the L button, the number of clams that each teammate has pops up next to their names. In a similar vein, if somebody presses this way, it would be really great if the game could also tell me the number of clams the player has next to their name. You know how many times I've seen somebody press this way, like right next to the enemy basket? I jump with them with like 1 or 2 clams, and I expect us to form a power clam together, and it's like, oh no, actually, I needed you to have a power clam, and like, oh wait, I thought you had a power clam, and oh okay, this is awkward. Wow, and I was just sitting here alone. Dinner without clams. Worst date ever. I'd have 2 more suggestions for clamblets, actually. Now, don't get me wrong, I love clams, but it's the first generation of a mode, and as such, it's still a work in progress. A change that might be worth thinking about is to nerf super jumps in clamblets. That is, if a player super jumps with a power clam, I'd like them to drop the clam, just like you drop the clam after a splashdown, for example. Otherwise, whether you'll have a guaranteed score or not depends on the lag in the game, and I feel like such a game-deciding moment shouldn't be decided by internet latency. Also, I have this tiny nitpick inspired by Dude's video on map mode combos. I think clams shouldn't spawn right below the basket, especially if that basket is open. At that point, it's basically just RNG giving the attacking team 3 points, and I don't think we'd want that. Though one way to go around this would be if you made it more transparent where the clams spawn, then people could just basically use that knowledge as an advanced strategy, similar to this strat where you pick up only 3 out of 4 clams to stop the corresponding enemy clams from respawning. But then making the clam drops non-random would be a huge change, and I'm not exactly sure if that's worth it, so maybe just reposition the clams. Okay, you folks are probably used to me meandering a lot at this point, but I actually have a few ideas that I'd just like to list as bullet points. When I'm in League and we fight a team at similar strength, I would love to rematch them, so please add a rematch feature. It would be a small fun detail if the loading screens in rank could differ depending on which mode we're playing. I feel like having the tower control tower look the same in every stage is a little bit of a lost opportunity. I suggest that the towers should look just a tiny little bit different depending on which map we're on. Please. Okay, most importantly, please add an overtime countdown. And also, please make it a bit more transparent whether or not you get overtime at all. Actually, if you're still wondering why I'm asking for an overtime countdown in Splatoon, just take a look at this clip. I should have known, I'm jumping. Yes! Oh, that was so close. Oh, that was so close. That was so close. I can't even. Wait. Wait, what? Wait, what? Wait, what? What just happened? Wait, what just happened? No, but no. No. But I threw this. No. Finally, I just want to say how I really appreciate that Splatoon does not have voice chat in ranked. I see it brought up a lot in review videos, people complaining about how Nintendo is so behind the times, not adding voice chat to their competitive game. So this request, it's more directed towards game reviewers. Please don't. Even just adding optional voice chat, it doesn't actually leave you with an option. To win games, turning off such a crucial means of communication, it would put you at a huge disadvantage. So as the player, you're either forced to turn on voice chat, or to accept that you will always perform worse than players who are willing to chat with random others. For anyone who feels more vulnerable in voice chats, this would literally, and I'm not exaggerating here, ruin the entire game. I usually tend to talk around the bush about these things, but let me be clear here for once. I think it would be particularly bad for women and girls who play Splatoon. I still remember vividly being in a private battle with Discord voice chat one day, and most of the people in the call were teenage boys. We were just trying out Fizzy Bombs, which released the evening prior. And, well, I'm gonna spare you the details, but just let me tell you, it was bad. Like, you wouldn't believe the kind of conversations some people have in semi-public voice chats. Can you imagine ranked Splatoon being like that? I actually ended up leaving that part of the community, in part due to things like this. And I'm glad I found other Splatoon groups that were more wholesome, otherwise I would have probably just left for good. Okay, quick story time though, but the first Splatoon team that I stumbled into was actually run by a then 18-year-old girl, who was training as a nurse, and in her free time she worked tirelessly to build up a competitive Splatoon team. All the while, most members, they didn't even come to practice, and whenever they did, they would just treat her like some maid. The tech guy even muted her one time when she disagreed with him. Like, what? Did you know that some people play this game for reasons other than to lose their sanity in ranked? Yeah, for some people, this game is about playing private battles with their friends, or about mastering that hazard level max in Salmon run. Well then, let's speak private battles. Splatoon allows us to play any game mode in any map with friends online. However, playing in a private group also means that people will want to play by their own rules. And it would be huge if Splatoon could accommodate this. I'd love it if they could give us more options. Interestingly, there's already one oddly specific option that you can pick in Splatoon, which is to turn off sub-abilities. Yay! It would be very easy and cheap to expand on this, and maybe give us the option to turn off abilities altogether. Or how about buffing or nerfing specific players by making their abilities more effective? I could imagine that being really useful in a smaller group with unbalanced skills, or an uneven number of players. Speaking of balance, I think creating teams in private lobbies should be made easier. It would be great if besides the option of custom teams and random assignments, you could also have players be assigned automatically based on their ranks. Creating balanced and fun lobbies is a bit of an art that involves knowing everybody in the lobby, and it would be great if the game could just make it a little bit easier for us. Oh, and please, let us correct team assignments after they've been done. It has happened to me and others so many times that we accidentally added the wrong player to a team, made somebody a spectator that shouldn't have been, or that somebody drops out and you'd want to assign the teams from scratch. As far as single player goes, I'm ready to let myself be surprised by the development team. I could tell you about my dreams of a grand world with many characters that explain the deep lore of the game. And I mean, I wouldn't mind dishing out $70 for a 50-hour Splatoon single-player adventure. But to be honest, that's probably not priority number one. So I just have a few ideas that I would like to throw into the ring. I'd like to see a level timer in all single-player levels. Especially in Octo expansion. That would have been neat. You could easily add a hard mode to single player by giving players the option to play without shield. Please. Nintendo. Please consider adding squid children to single player, because looking at the official artwork, it seems like that would be really adorable. I stumbled upon this artwork by Choppy Dust a while ago, and I mean, just look at this little ink monster. We need to have those in Splatoon. Oh, and those takoyaki from Splatoon 1. They're best boys. Please bring them back. The interesting situation about Salmon is that many novice players consider it to be one of their favorites, whereas people with more playtime feel like it gets stale after a while. Just looking at the numbers, I can see why that is. There are 5 maps in Salmon, a rotation lasts 18 hours, and within that time, there isn't really any variation. And it has like 2 songs. On the other side, giving Salmon a proper variety with 20 maps and 16 soundtracks, like in the player versus player mode, that would cost way too many resources, and I'm not sure if it's worth it, to be honest. This entire video is supposed to be about somewhat easy to implement ideas that would improve gameplay a lot, so just saying, give us more, it doesn't make me feel good about this. On the other side, I feel like that is exactly what Salmon needs in order to shine. It's kind of a question about the general design of the game. Do we want Salmon to stand on its own, as a mode that people want to play for hours and hours? Or should it just be a little bit of spice for in-between ranked and turf war sessions? If the former is what Nintendo is going for, then I wouldn't mind Salmon being a standalone title in the Splatoon franchise. But I think what is holding Salmon back is the amount of content and not certain design decisions. So I don't really have any simple ideas here. I do think, however, that the player base of Splatoon has proved committed enough for Salmon to be open 24 hours a day. People have been wondering, like, why is there this shift system at all? And my guess is that it's probably so that there are plenty of players available during those opening times. And maybe they're also trying to make sure that not too many people are taken away from the player versus player modes. You know, just in general, to avoid diluting the player base. Something that developers of an online game have to be really cautious about. After all, if you've got plenty of modes, but not enough players to fill a lobby, then there's basically no game. That said, with 10 million sales for Splatoon 2, I think there should be enough players to handle this extra game mode. So, if you've got fun game modes, and everything works alright, then you've got a great game, right? Well, yes. But Splatoon is so much more than just a shooter sandbox. The game has set new standards in creative weapon and character design. I mean, from a game that has a bathtub as a weapon, you expect greatness. So, how can Nintendo step it up in Splatoon 3? One point that I hear repeatedly, and that was probably even mentioned during the transition from Splatoon 1 to Splatoon 2, is the design of the alternative weapon kits. It would be really nice if the difference could be a little bit more than just a sticker on the weapon. You know, it's just like what you see on the aerosprays, the deco weapons, or the brellas. It doesn't even have to be one of those super involved redesigns like you see on Sheldon's pics. Speaking of cosmetics, one thing that was noticeable when I compared Splatoon 1 and Splatoon 2 was that in the latter, it was much easier for me to recognize each player's character as an individual. In Splatoon 2, you are able to see somebody's personality reflected in their Inkling or Octoling in a way that you can't really do in Splatoon 1. However, I'd like this to actually go all the way. I would like to be able to customize my character to the point where if somebody sees me in a game, people immediately know, aha, that's Snowpoke. To be fair, we're already pretty close to that, but giving us a few more options would help out a lot. To begin with, I'd like to separate headgear and accessories. Headgear would include any item that you put onto your head, like beanies, caps, bandanas, and the like. Accessories on the other side could be glasses, face masks, ear clips, and makeup. Oh yeah, did I mention? I'd like makeup as a customization option. I mean, Inklings, they're supposed to be 14, right? I think my character deserves to experiment with makeup and come up with stupid variations that she then decides to never try out again. You know, just like some 14-year-olds do. On the other side, I think headgear should come with abilities, just like in Splatoon 2, whereas accessories and makeup, they should be independent from the ability system. Just like at the moment you see with legwear, for example. Speaking of which, I'd love to have more legwear options, even if that comes at the cost of fewer regular gear items. There would be one very easy way though to give us more legwear options and more hairstyles, and that would be to make those independent of gender. Splatoon conveys a character's gender by the ways their eyes look, the general movement, and their sound effects. Which, by the way, are very cute. Keep up the good work. I think characters should be able to wear what previously would have been considered the other gender's style, without it looking out of place. And then, of course, there are also a lot of people in the community who would just like to mix up those styles to be able to express their identity properly. Finally, there's another thing that I would like to pitch. And I know this one would be a little bit harder in implementation, and probably not even be considered worth the cost. But hear me out. Can we have gear items that span over multiple body parts? Like imagine a hoodie, but you can actually wear the hoodie over the head. Or cute full body costumes. So many cute costumes. I know it would be a lot of work, but in my eyes, this is totally worth it. But do you know what would grind my gears? If that adorable costume I really want my Inkling to have would only be available in one region. I feel like Nintendo has learned from the whole #gear from all fiasco, so I just hope they keep that in mind while designing their gear or making contracts with their advertisement partners. I also hear a lot of ideas floating around concerning the practice range. Nintendo seems to be imagining the practice range as a minimal room where players can try out weapons and understand their mechanics. In the meanwhile, the enthusiast player base is dreaming of an actual practice room akin to Smash Bros. Practice mode. And I don't fully know what to think about that. On the one side, if being good at Splatoon means spending all day in a practice room, then that would make being good at Splatoon considerably less fun. On the other side, I oftentimes feel like I don't really have a lot of control over how my skills develop. I spend so much time playing Splatoon, but there are just a few scenarios that I feel like I just don't get better at. And that frustrates me. For me, one of those problems would be inkjet practice. There just isn't really a good way of practicing your inkjet movements and your inkjet aim, besides applying a lot of special charge up and then going into battles hoping to get more than a few seconds of inkjet gameplay. I wish I had some control over how my skills develop, and while doing twin practice with friends is fun, I don't really want to have to use my friends as test dummies. I also think that there aren't a lot of good ways to spend in-game money in Splatoon at the moment. So maybe one potential change could be that you could upgrade training items in Shadow's practice range. It would make a great difference to just have a few different dummies that move in other speeds, or maybe even change their direction randomly. It would also be great to have some kind of element in the room that causes you damage, so you can try out the defensive abilities a little bit better. For example, I'd love to test out how a special power-up impacts my Baller Shield, or how much damage my Tentabrella Shield can handle. Finally, it would be great if we could activate Infinite Ink or Infinite Special in the practice range. Oh, and people told me they really want their basketball hoop from Splatoon 1 back. Another way of practicing that seems oddly limited at the moment is that of going through stages outside of battle. I can only enter recon mode in the maps that are currently in rotation, but sometimes I really feel like trying out a certain strategy on a map that isn't playable at the moment. I feel like it would be fairly easy to just add an other maps option below the two normal recon choices. Speaking of gear, what about the actual abilities? I love the abilities in Splatoon. I just have a few thoughts about changes into Splatoon 3. A bit of a frustration that I've run into over time is that some of the changes that you get with the abilities aren't particularly intuitive. We've probably all tried using run speed up on a brush, hoping that it would make us, run faster. It also doesn't make you run faster in a Ebola. But do you know what it does do? It makes your inkjet fly faster. But only the speed that you have while holding ZR. Because your ZR flying speed is linked to your main weapon strafing speed, which becomes faster when you apply run speed up. Easy. That's also why the inkjet flying speed while holding ZR is much faster than Octobrush, as compared to Glugas, by the way. I main Glugas and I envy Octobrush players every day for that. Oh, and if you'd like to do me a favor, go into the comment section of this video and try to explain to me how last-ditch effort works, but without looking it up. Good luck. Other things that surprise a lot of players is how Object Shredder doesn't work on Brellas, Bomb Defense Up doesn't work on the Rainmaker, and I still have to make a video that investigates whether it works on the Booyah Bomb. Like it should, but I feel like it doesn't. Also, Thermal Ink doesn't apply to Blaster indirects, and then there's also everything about quick respawn. Again, I love the ability mechanism in Splatoon, and overall it is fairly consistent. But it would be great if Splatoon 3 picked up the design paradigm, that the improvements are transparent and obvious to the player. Just like in the step from Splatoon 1 to Splatoon 2, I expect that some of the abilities that we have to our use will be changed. I've got a few ideas for changes, and with those I try to keep two things in mind. For one, I think abilities should always be noticeable to the player. Let's take a Bomb Defense Up DX for an example. I think that Bomb Defense Up is an underrated ability, and sometimes I use a main or even a pure of it. But here's the issue. It's really boring. Like, I could be using Swim Speed Up instead, and I would be super speedy. Instead, when running Bomb Defense Up or Ink Resistance Up, I don't really notice a difference, and that's no fun. Another thing that I find important is that abilities should be rewarding to the person who equips it, rather than punishing to the opponent. Respawn Punisher is the prime example for that, but I also think that Horn's Respawn Punisher effect should be reconsidered. In the case of Horned, you don't even know if the person you splatted is affected by the Respawn Punish effect. So the enemy will be respawning slower and be frustrated over that, but you don't even get to feel the joy of knowing that your ability did something. That just sounds like a net negative to me. In a similar vein, I'm not a big fan of the damage up effects on main power-up. What all of these abilities have in common is that they risk making the affected player salty more than they actually bring joy to the player equipping them. So let me introduce some ability ideas. First of all, Respawn Punisher is meant to be used by anchor players primarily. So those are players that tend to stay back and try to keep the team's Slayer safe and offer a safe jumping point. Anchors would be chargers or high-range Splatlings usually. As far as abilities for those players go, how about instead of Respawn Punisher, we would have an ability that lets others super jump to you faster, and maybe even highlights you on the map. That kind of ability would be just as useful to an anchor player, but without feeling punishing to the opponents. For other ability ideas, there is this amazing work by Alexis Florm, who has created a detailed artwork and game concept in their project Splatoon 3. They suggest the following 3 abilities that I think are pretty neat. Health Recovery Up lets you recover health more quickly, especially when in kit form. Imagine Ink Recovery Up, but instead of ink, you recover your health faster. They also suggest an ability called Schooling, which sounds like a great idea. What it does is it buffs your abilities when you're close to your teammates and also buffs their abilities a bit. So it would be very useful if you want to implement more teamwork in your gameplay. Finally, they suggest an ability called Predator, which improves your movement and your health regeneration. What it does is it gives you a sub of certain abilities for each number of opponents that exceeds the number of teammates that are close to you. So basically, if you go into a battle at a numbers disadvantage, this ability will help you a little bit. That sounds kind of risky to me, but for some it might be worth it. Of course, everyone expects Splatoon 3 to come with new weapons, and I personally really enjoy how non-shootery Splatoon games feel sometimes. So considering how many shooter weapons there are in the game at the moment, it would be cool if some more non-shooter style weapons could be added. You know, just to balance that out a little bit. In particular, while Splatoon 2 has added a lot of creative sloshers, the classes of Brellas and Brushes are a little bit anemic. I wouldn't mind there not being any new shooter style weapons at all in Splatoon 3, And in fact, I'd imagine that at some point we might have to talk about dropping weapons from the game. I mean, I love that Splatoon has so many weapons and so much weapon variety, but I wonder about the upkeep of all of that. Let me be honest here. I don't know a lot about game development, and I have no idea if having 500 weapons in Splatoon 10 is an issue at all. But considering that I would like alternative kits to have their own designs, and also expect to see new weapons that are uniquely designed, I think it would be fine if some of the previous weapons don't make the cut. For context, I main Glugadulis, a rather niche weapon that I myself am not sure would make it into future games. So this idea scares me a little bit. But with a new game, I'd love some new freshness, and I understand that that might mean that some features that we liked from the previous game could be removed. However, if Nintendo does decide to remove certain weapons into Splatoon 3, it would be great if we could be told as early as possible so that people won't be too disappointed while waiting for their favorite weapon to arrive. Let's talk music. I love the music in Splatoon 2, and I love the music in Splatoon 1. I would love them even more if they were both in the same game. I imagine the reason why Splatoon 1 and Splatoon 2 have different music and ink colors is so they can have their own unique and distinct personality. And that's fair. You'd want the games to have a different feel and identity. But people for whom it's the most important that the games feel different, so that would be like game reviewers and enthusiasts like me, they would probably be getting Splatoon 3 rather early. So if the game itself releases with new content only, but then over time, older music and ink colors would be added to the game, I don't think anybody would mind. And the game itself would still keep its fresh Splatoon 3 identity. So Nintendo could just go and add the old music or maybe remixes thereof in the style of Splatoon 3, and the old colors maybe as a monthly thing, and that would be super cool. And since that would be balanced by the new content that is added over time, the game would still be able to keep its identity, despite the older content being there too. In Splatoon 2, which has 16 songs, 23 maps, and 7 colors for ranked and turf each, I feel like there's a bit of a mismatch in priorities. I'd imagine that creating and balancing maps must be quite an expensive effort, whereas creating music is probably a little bit cheaper, and adding colors to the game should be essentially free. While I personally don't quite agree with the notion of some competitive players that they should remove maps from Splatoon, I do think adding more songs and ink colors would add more variety to the game than an extra map or two. So here's what I would suggest for Splatoon 3. Just like Splatoon 2, the game would start with 8 maps, but at least 6 of them should be new. It would also come with 8 new songs from the get-go, and have 8 new ink colors that can be used in both ranked and in Turf War. For reference, Splatoon 2 actually started with only 5 songs. I got a little bit late into Splatoon 2, and it already had 10 music tracks by then. But if there were only the same 5 songs playing over and over again, I can't imagine it not getting stale rather quickly. I'm also confused as to why so many ink color schemes look so similar to each other. And I don't understand why the colors for Turf War and for Ranked have to be separate. If the idea is to give them distinct identities, I'm not sure if it's working out. Instead, I just like Splatoon 3 to start with 8 ink colors that span over both Ranked and Turf War, and that should still look reasonably different from one another. My idea is that new music would also be integrated into the monthly update cycle, and it could be a new song one month and then a new map the other month. In that case, by new I mean either entirely new songs, or songs based on those of the previous games. Like imagine a remix or something. And during the bigger, full-numbered updates, they could also add some new ink colors to the game. Well everyone, I'm done here. If all the things I mentioned in this video are implemented, this is gonna be the perfect game. So thank you so much for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing this video. Oh. Looks like this video is not quite over yet. Okay, so enough with the fun colors and music and everything, because there's one big issue that I think you folks are probably waiting for me to address. I think we all know that the connection stability in Splatoon is one of the most debated points in our community, and I think there's a huge disconnect between Nintendo and the players here. As far as networking is concerned, I feel like Nintendo doesn't fully understand how their decisions impact players from the West. I have watched C rank and B rank gameplay from Japan before, and what stood out to me was that there are hardly any disconnects in those matches. And if I asked the streamers of those matches about this, they say they don't really have that many bad experiences. Well, for us in the West, that is decisively not the experience that we're having. I would even go as far as to say that matches in C rank and B rank, they're mostly decided by which team is fully playing. In my experiences, there are disconnects in about half of the matches in C rank and B rank. And whenever there are new players in my stream and they ask me, hey, how am I going to make it to A rank? I usually just tell them, well, the matches in C rank and B rank, you don't really have that much of an impact on their results. But if you keep playing, you'll make it through them eventually. And I don't really think that's the way it should be. Luckily, C rank and B rank players, they also don't really have the awareness to notice what is happening in their matches or if there are disconnects or non-players. So at least they're not going to be too frustrated. And I think it's actually on purpose that Nintendo makes disconnects a little bit hard to notice for newer players. However, it carries through into the higher ranks. In X rank, I'd say, per rotation, I run into about 2 matches with a disconnect. Though on bad days, it can be much more. And in S+, I'd say it's about twice as many. So basically, you have to make it into the higher ranks to experience Splatoon without lots of disconnects. Though at that point, you'll be running into more and more trouble with the game balancing, actually. I'm not exactly sure how game testing works at Nintendo, but I'd recommend that some of the game developers that work in testing the networking of the final product, that they also try it out in a Western country. You know, just so they know what it's like for us. After all, the differences in matchmaking and networking, they do cause the game to play out quite differently. Within the Splatoon community, you hear a lot of people asking for dedicated servers, but I feel like that doesn't necessarily address the issue. In particular, I noticed that the players who complain the most about Nintendo's network quality, they tend to have rather spotty internet connections themselves. So, I'm not quite sure who to blame here. I do think that the Switch's hardware has a big impact though. The Switch itself has a rather weak Wi-Fi adapter, and the device is made to be used in different places all over the home. So I think most people, they're gonna watch YouTube or browse Reddit on their phone, and they think, well, I guess if that works, Splatoon should be working fine too, right? But for all sorts of reasons, that is not the case. And so you have people connecting to Grandma's old router, wondering why their connection isn't stable. I understand that Nintendo wouldn't want to bundle a more expensive Wi-Fi router with the Switch, when it would only be useful in a handful of games. And they can't really kick people out of matches either, because they still want to accommodate to people with weaker connections. This affects children in particular, who don't always have a good understanding about how the internet works, and they can't really get their parents to get a more expensive router or to switch their internet provider. So when I try to think about ways to improve Splatoon's online service, I think about things that can be implemented within Splatoon that do not require better hardware on either side and do not lock out new players. So what options of improving everybody's experience do we have left? First of all, I think the game needs a mechanic to abort matches early. A sizable portion of disconnects happen before the match even starts, causing the dreaded poof at the start animation. What makes this even more frustrating is that sometimes the disconnect happens so early in the matchmaking that the name drops out during the matchmaking screen, and the game even describes the match as a 7-squid match. Like, if the game knows that a player is missing, why even make us play in the first place? Matches with disconnects are so wildly unbalanced that it's just no fun to play them at all. If at the match start there aren't 8 players ready to play, I would like it that the lobby would just straight up get cancelled and the players get put back into the matchmaking screen. Another issue that I sometimes experience is that of multi-disconnections, where more than one player disconnects at the same time. Or sometimes you have a match that starts with a bunch of players missing. I think we've all been in those scarily long starting screens where we don't know, are we going to actually play the game, or are we just going to all be dropped and lose a bunch of points? My interpretation of what might be happening at such a moment is that one player disconnects and then takes another player down with them who was relying on that player to transfer packets. Or maybe a host just doesn't have the capacity to send or receive information from everyone at the same time, and so just ends up dropping a few players. In either way, it is one person having a bad connection, and then other people disconnecting because of it. It would be nice if there was a way to take these players back into the lobby. I have to admit here, I don't know how difficult this would be to implement. And for fairness, I should even mention this particular issue would actually be alleviated by dedicated servers. All things considered, it would be nice if players who drop out of the match despite themselves having a stable connection either don't lose points or get to connect back to the game. Okay, those were mechanisms that I'm not sure how viable they actually are to implement within Nintendo's peer-to-peer system. I do have a few ideas though that should still make a difference and should be somewhat easy to implement. First of all, from chatting with my viewers and also from personal experience actually, I know that some of the disconnects happen because the player's Switch runs out of battery during a match. I feel like that should be rather easy to check for. If at the start of the game the player's battery is charged to less than 10%, the game just shouldn't let you start matches. I imagine the current Switch API, the programming interface, probably doesn't let the Splatoon programmers check for your battery charge during the gameplay. So that's something that should be considered for a future console. Although, it's not like Nintendo hasn't added extra feature for specific games before. In a similar vein, the game could also stop you from playing a game if your controller's batteries are nearly depleted, which I know happens to everybody at least once. Finally, I have an idea on how to slightly improve the players' internet connections. Keep in mind, players do have some impact on the quality of their connection. For example, by choosing where they play from, or whether or not they use a wired connection. So I've already said, I don't want players with bad connections to be punished further than they already are within the current system. But what about the opposite? What if we flip the script and reward players who have a particularly good connection? Here's what I imagine. After a match, if your connection has been particularly stable, you get some extra experience, items, or ability chunks. The most involved and charming implementation that I can imagine would be that after a match with a really good connection, you get some kind of ticket. And then there's a character in the plaza who really likes those tickets and lets you trade them for random stuff. You know, similar to how the Grisco rewards are handled, but with a slightly less sketchy boss. Another feature worth spending resources into is a local multiplayer experience on one device and one screen. Smash has it, Mario Kart has it, honestly any multiplayer game should have it. It would turn Splatoon from a fun game that you buy for yourself into part of the family game library. Even though I personally enjoy ranked Splatoon the most, I imagine the strongest potential for Splatoon in it being a fun experience that you can have with your friends. Part of the Nintendo console's appeal, after all, is that they're the kind of consoles that you can talk about even with your casual friends, and that parents feel comfortable buying for the family. While I do understand that Nintendo imagined a household where every member of the family has their own Switch or Switch Lite, I think that people would be much more willing to give Splatoon a chance if you can play it with friends using only one copy of the game, and without requiring a stable network connection. It would also make it much easier to introduce the game to friends that you have invited over. Being able to show your favorite game to your friends is so much fun, and that's something that we're somewhat missing out with Splatoon at the moment. How would it actually work to put one-device multiplayer into Splatoon? Honestly, I think split screen is fine. I know it would be kinda janky, but when I have a friend over, I don't need the game to give me an optimal experience. Splashing and splatting around with my friend is enough to make it a joyful time. Even if the resolution is a little bit lower, or I have to squint my eyes a little bit to figure out what's going on, it would still be a lot of fun. I'm pretty sure people would let their friends play a few rounds in full screen anyways, so they won't walk away remembering only the limited experience. By the way, I always see people ask, how are you gonna make multiple players fit onto one screen anyways? So I've drawn this mock-up of what it could look like. We can put all the data from the heads-up display onto the right side of the screen, and then we'd have a lot of space for two players on the left side. And those would be playing at a 21:9 aspect ratio, but by cutting off a little bit from the top and the bottom, and adding a little bit of side on the left and the right, we'd still have a very appealing and fair gameplay experience. Now, for something entirely different. I have this nitpick on how Nintendo handles player names in their video games. There probably have been people before who complained about the character limit in names, but oftentimes it's just considered to be one of those Nintendo things. You know, things that don't really make that much sense at first glance, but still have smart intentions behind them. But here's the catch. It's not actually a Nintendo thing. It's a localization thing. In Japanese, which of course is the main language for Switch development, 10 characters are actually plenty. However, since the English language is so much less efficient than Japanese, it turns into a problem when we are restricted by the same character limit. I looked into a few studies about language efficiency, where scientists quantify the efficiency of a language using a metric called bits per character. And their study shows that the Japanese language provides about 3.5 bits of information per character, whereas in English, you have 1.3 bits at the most. This superior efficiency has two reasons mostly. One thing is, the Japanese language is just really, really efficient. And the other thing is, well, if you look at Japanese characters, their characters are usually equivalent to multiple characters in English, or in most Western languages even. So if we use the numbers from before, we can say that to convey the same information that Japanese names can convey in 10 characters, we'd need 27 characters in English. To be fair, the Nintendo Switch doesn't allow users to use kanji in their usernames, so a little bit of the efficiency is actually lost there. Still, you can reasonably argue that Nintendo's 10 character limit in Japanese would be closer to a 20 character limit in English. As a matter of fact, you might remember how a few years ago, Twitter extended their character limit from 140 characters to 280 characters. In Japanese, Korean, and Chinese, this limit is actually still at 140 characters. The reason for that is that those languages, they just convey more information in 140 characters than English ever could in 280. I know that this is something that the Splatoon developers don't really have that much power over, but I wish that a future Switch system could implement a different character limit for Western languages. Now, on the other side, I understand though that you wouldn't want the player names to be so long as to break the flow of text inside of games. So at the end of the day, I would suggest maybe increase the character limit to 15 characters for the Western players. To drive my point home, here are the translations of some names of Japanese top 500 players. Nemuri Hime, Sleeping Princess. Hyakusetsu Futo. No matter how many times you fail and feel frustrated, you should stand up without being disappointed. Don't be afraid of any difficulties and stick to your original will. Yeah, Japanese can be really efficient sometimes. Niwatori, chicken. Fukatsu no sniper, sniper of revival. Kimi wa corona da, your corona. Akaebi, red shrimp. Mume no tensai, unnamed genius. Of course, you could try to shorten those English translations to somewhat fit player names into 10 characters, but here's the thing. The Japanese names I listed are actually grammatically correct, and not shortened in any way. Their character system and their language, they're just that efficient. They don't need more than 10 characters, but we do. I'm going a bit off topic here, but I think the most extreme case that I've actually seen was in Animal Crossing. Your island name is limited to 10 characters only, in both Japanese and English. But in English, just the word island already takes up 6 characters. And then you'd also need a white space before that word. So if you want to call your island something something island, you'd just be left with 3 characters for whatever is the something something. Ouch. In the meanwhile, in Japanese, you only need to add shima to a word to turn it into an island name, which is just 2 characters. So you'd still have 8 characters left for the main name, and as you've seen above, you can do plenty with that. Let me introduce to you Hyakusetsu Futoshima, a valid 10-character island name, which in English translates to the not-so-concise, no matter how many times you fail and feel frustrated, you should stand up without being disappointed, don't be afraid of any difficulties, and stick to your original will. Island. And now, for a bunch of small things that could improve the gameplay experience a bit. It would be fun if you could cheer for specific teammates at the end of matches. A lot of strategy would be added to the game if you let players see in the heads-up display how far their teammates have charged their special. So, online saves would be nice. Getting all of those ability chunks was a lot of work, and I don't want to lose them just because I'm having my Joy-Cons repaired for the 10th time. I think the Plaza Post drawing screen should have a tool to move pixels. There should be a way to present the news a little bit faster. I think the news report is a great way for story exposition, but I'm sure it could be done a little bit more efficiently. Whenever I super jump, I tend to accidentally also activate Booyah or this way sometimes, and I feel really bad about that. It makes me wish that those callouts were disabled during the first few frames after starting a super jump. Did I mention online saves? Like, Nintendo, you know that if something happens to my Switch, my 5,000 hour save file is gone, right? Nintendo, can you hear me? So, you might be watching this video right now, and I mean, I don't know what the reception of this video is gonna be, but if there are a bunch of downvotes, you might be wondering, okay, wait, why does this video have so many downvotes? It's not that bad. Upcoming, it's gonna be the section about world design and character design, and most importantly, the design of the idols in Splatoon. Let's get going. For one example on world building, I would like to again refer to Alexis Florm's Project Splatoon 3. Their concept of an Inkopolis Bay Plaza is really beautiful, and it would make the game feel very new and different, despite being recognizable and clearly feeling like it belongs into a Splatoon game. I personally could also imagine a more Octoling themed world for Splatoon 3. After Splatoon 1 being purely about Inklings, and Splatoon 2 mixing both Inklings and Octoling storylines, how about a Splatoon 3 that completes the world created by the previous games and shows us what a world inhabited by Octolings could look like? I like that the Splatoon lore has this idea of neither the Inklings nor the Octolings being right in the conflict that they're in, and that they're both just trying to survive in a world with limited resources. It would be so interesting to see how the Octolings' reality contrasts with what we've before learned from the Inklings' perspective. Overall, I am very happy with the way that the Splatoon team creates its world, and how the maps in Splatoon are identifiable as real places in the Inklings' world. If I were to name one thing that bothers me a little bit, and it actually bothered me more when I started out in Splatoon than it does now after 4,000 hours, is that some of the places feel a little bit similar in their themes. For example, Humpback Pump Track, Gobi Arena, and Muscle Forge Fitness are all indoor fitness halls. As an experienced player, I can now see the huge differences in gameplay they bring, but especially when I started out, they somewhat just felt the same to me. Similarly, Sturgeon Shipyard, Piranha Pit, and Port Mackerel are all outdoor construction sites. Even now I have a hard time keeping the names of the maps apart, because their identities are such a blur to me. I can understand how both of these themes, fitness halls and construction sites, can be a really good basis for battle maps. You can just freely place obstacles, and it still feels natural within the environment. That said, I'd say that in Splatoon 2, Nintendo has done a really great job turning unusual places into battle maps, and still having them feel good. Wahoo World, Schellendorf Institute, and Skipper Pavilion stand out to me as beautiful and unique places that I would truly enjoy hanging out in, even outside of battle. Going into those maps in recon mode really feels like you're exploring part of Inkopolis, and for a second, you'd even forget that this game is about battling. And that's something that I love about Splatoon. I'm not sure how many map ideas the Splatoon team has on their back burner, but I try to come up with maps that I would really enjoy playing in, and I'd like to pitch 6 map concepts. 3 of them are for indoor maps, and the other 3 are outdoor maps. The indoor maps would be a space station, a firefighter space, and the previously rumored Pearl's Mansion. For outdoor maps, I'm imagining an outdoor restaurant on a beach or an island, a movie set, and a mountainside map. Besides new maps, there's this one oddly specific request that I hear people voice over and over again in my chat. People want Splatoon to have a day-night cycle. Now I think that would probably be pretty hard to implement, considering that players in the game come from all sorts of time zones all around the world. But how about we'd have the maps differ slightly based on season? The vast majority of Splatoon players live in the Northern Hemisphere, so we would actually all be in sync with our seasons. And of course, if there's a lobby with a majority of Southern Hemisphere people, the seasons would be swapped. Also, since the differences between maps would be more subtle, being placed into a lobby with a different season wouldn't be too big of a deal. Finally, a crucial point of the Splatoon worlds are the idols. So far, every release of Splatoon has come with their own set of idols. And from my conversations with other players, people are expecting Splatoon 3 to also come with new idols. In particular, I often hear people in the community ask about a male idol. Now, honestly, that's not the number one thing on my mind, but it does make for an interesting perspective to analyze idol design. Interestingly, this wish is also voiced by players of all genders somewhat equally often. I personally don't really mind whether they keep Pearl or Marina for another time, or if we get new idols altogether, but let's entertain this thought for a second. The choice of idols is a very sensitive one, and it has a big impact in signalizing who the game is supposed to appeal to. From what I've heard about the development in Splatoon 1, one of the main ideas was to attract more girls and women into Nintendo's new competitive shooter, which is a domain that is usually dominated by male players. In this context, it makes sense that both idols in Splatoon 1 are female, that the box art and the branding in general are centered around the Inkling girl more, and that the design of the Inkling boys seems to have been a little bit of an afterthought. Actually, I think there's an interview where they confirmed that they added Inkling boys to the game just last second. I assume that what Nintendo is going for is a game that appeals to all genders, to players of different backgrounds, and that offers them a friendly atmosphere. Arguably, this is something that other competitive games have failed at. Since competitive video games tend to appeal to boys more, even if they're cute and cartoonish, you would need there to be an overwhelming amount of elements in the game design that confirms that this game also appeals to girls, even to just reach something close to parity. If you keep this in mind, having a male idol is a little bit of a departure from the previous strategy. Though I feel like Nintendo is already attempting to appeal a little bit more to the male player base with the entire Octoling arc of the game. My interpretation is that Nintendo is kind of trying to put a dichotomy between a more female-oriented Inkling world, designed around style and fashion, and a more male-oriented Octoling world, designed around technology and science, I guess. I mean, it's a bit stereotypical. But the game is designed in Japan, and over there they have this idea that girls and boys have to be very different in their character and interests. The issue that I'm worried about is what kind of character design they might choose in order to appeal to boys. My impression is that many characters in games that try to appeal to a male player base tend to have a very two-dimensional personality design. You usually have the male hero that the player is supposed to project himself onto, a perfect-looking dude with no character flaws. And then there are the female sidekicks, with clothes, or lack thereof, that are unrealistic for anybody to willingly wear, to the point where it destroys the entire realism of the character. If the Splatoon developers try to appeal to male players a bit more, I am worried that they might fall into the same trap, and in the process alienate girls and make lots of players feel awkward about their favorite game. I personally believe that this kind of character design is unnecessary and that boys would enjoy and profit from empathetic and realistic characters much more. While I love Octolings and I think Marina is great, I'm a bit worried that Nintendo might choose to go into this awkward direction with the female Octolings, especially if you look at how they clothe, move, and gesture towards the player. So if there were new idols, it would be important to give them unique personalities that makes them stand apart from the other characters in the game. I think that Nintendo did a great job with Callie, Marie, and Pearl, but they didn't give us that much character depth with Marina, sadly. She has a traumatic backstory and all, but everything we ever get to see from her is basically just her being Miss Perfect. Now, I believe that this does actually fit into the lore of the game. Her trying to adjust into Inkling culture, trying to be a model citizen, and in a result displaying extreme perfectionism. But you never really get to see that in her dialogue. The one exception is when she snapped after losing 3 Splatfests in a row. But that was more of an isolated incident, in one local translation. You know, sometimes I feel like Nintendo is designing Marina more as a perfect girlfriend material, rather than a believable character with her own flaws. So I'm kind of worried that Nintendo might be falling into exactly the same trap that I outlined earlier. with her having a rather simple personality design, and an outfit and physique that obliges to what Nintendo probably thinks appeals to boys. And don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing that she has a somewhat pronounced chest. I mean, that's part of realistic female character design too. But I've always wondered, why does she choose to wear Octoling-like gear if she's trying to pass as an Inkling? Like, isn't that, like, really dangerous? And, you know, maybe there's, like, some deep lore behind that. But then again, like, why do Octolings look the way they do? Like, why do they dress like that? But, okay, whatever. Well, long story short, I still feel like that's not an excuse for her having such an unrealistic and oddly revealing outfit. On the opposite side, I think that Pearl's character design is fantastic. She has a complex personality that makes you think. Mostly about how much of a brat she is, but still, she's great. And her looks also set her clearly apart from the other characters in Splatoon. Whenever there's official artwork, Pearl always manages to stand out in her own unique way. I think whoever designed her character deserves a raise. A raise as big as her forehead. With all of that out of the way, if Nintendo were to give Splatoon 3 a male idol, what would I like his personality to be like? Well, I actually have two character types in mind. One inspired by a cartoon, and one inspired by a real person. I think one really cool character that Nintendo might want to take a look at is Greg from Steven Universe. Greg is the widowed father of the titular main character Steven, and as such, he's shown having very strong feelings of compassion towards his son, while also struggling with his own feelings of inadequacy, having complicated memories of Steven's mother, and also his own dreams of becoming a rock star. Another really cool personality I could imagine for an idol is that inspired by a Twitch streamer called Yukon. I always felt like if I had a son, I would want him to watch Yukon stream and have him as a role model. Yukon streams are filled with positivity and humor, and you can really feel his love for his viewers and for the people around him. And for his cute dog, whose stories he shares regularly. However, he's also open about his struggles in life, and that he's still worried about a lot of things. Well, whether we'll get a little Gregling or a little Yukonling, I just hope that if Nintendo does decide to go with a male idol, he could be designed as a realistic and positive role model, who is willing to show compassion and doesn't fall into the cliches of previous male video game characters. Again, like legit, I don't care what gender the idols have. I just brought the whole thing up because I wanted to talk about relatable character design. Just look at the Splatoon community. It's full of lovely and empathetic people who have or had their own struggles growing up, and have found themselves in this wondrous world of squids and kids. For many, the Splatoon community has been a place of safety, where they can be who they are and be accepted for that. Having idols in the game with a complex personality would go a long way in underlining that they can be true to themselves, and that there's no need to just adhere to simple stereotypes. Okay, that was a bit of an awkward section, I gotta admit. So let's just finish on a few more small ideas. Give us more things to spend our coins on. I've got millions on my bank account, and I want to spend it. Let me buy things like plaza decoration, or extra rare gear. Please, let us sit down on the benches in the plaza. Look at my friends sitting there. I want to sit next to them. I love the little jellyfish in Splatoon, and I'd like more interaction with them. One particular scenario I have in mind is this. So, if you stand around idly in the plaza for a longer time, how about if a shy jellyfish could approaches you and would ask you for an autograph? Wouldn't that be awesome and cute? Please, let's do something like that. At this point, this video was actually supposed to end. But then, Nintendo brought back Splatfests, and I remembered, oh yeah, right, those are a thing. You know, that experience that for some people is the main reason to actually buy the entire game. Yeah, Splatfests. So, within the Splatoon enthusiast community, people's feelings towards Splatfest are actually surprisingly mixed. If you play Splatoon for hours every day, being restricted to turf war just isn't it. But if you just look at the players that only irregularly find themselves in Splatoon, you have to admit, Splatfest is a huge success. I'm a numbers person, and the numbers just don't lie here. People love Splatfests, and I think the whole times 100 match system and the team names were an amazing change. I am also impressed that we got such a big update on the Splatfest system from a free mid-release patch. It really did alter the Splatfest experience. Still, I sorely miss ranked modes during Splatfests, and I feel like the current system of Pro and Regular mode really makes for a great base to add ranked Splatoon to Splatfest. What I'd really enjoy would be if each Splatfest has only one ranked mode, and the Splatfest Shifty Station accommodates to that one ranked mode only. I think that with the Shifties, the gimmicks and the turf war experience should have priority, but I do think it should be possible to fit one ranked mode in there. And I mean, it's Splatfest. It doesn't matter if the map is slightly broken. Like, can you imagine Clam Blitz on the Bouncy Twins? It would be glorious and absolutely hilarious. I have to lament the number of Splatfests though. Nintendo originally promised 1 year of Splatfests, and then eventually increased it to 2 years. However, how long is the lifecycle of Splatoon 2 going to be? My guess is that Nintendo won't put 2 Splatoon games onto the same console, and that the gap between Splatoon 2 and 3 will be at least 5 years. So of those 5 years, only 2 of them will have Splatfests? Like, what? Splatfests are a main feature of Splatoons, and are even prominently featured in the advertising material. I have to applaud the Splatoon team for giving us so many feature updates, far more than any of us expected. But with Splatfests, I felt like they were under-delivering. Though, since starting my work on this video, Nintendo has actually brought back some Splatfests. I should have really gotten this video out earlier. I could have claimed credit for them coming back. I'm glad they made that decision though, because Splatfests are one of the main features of the game. They're one of the reasons that people buy the game for. I think it's unfair to us, the consumer, to turn those off after only 40% of the game's intended lifecycle. And even worse, originally they were going to have Splatfests for just 1 single year. In my view, if you intend the game's lifecycle to be 5 years, there should be Splatfests for at least 4 of those years. I don't care if there are reruns, or if later Splatfests are at a lower frequency. But turning off such a core feature of the game just feels like putting the entire game on life support. And I think that's how it was also understood by the wider audience. After Nintendo stopped Splatfests, new people asking in my stream if they should still bother buying the game at all has been a daily occurrence. And this stopped after they brought some of the Splatfests back. So I really hope that this signalizes an overall change in mindset on the side of Nintendo. For real this time. You've reached the end of the video. We did it! I finished creating this video, and you finished watching it, which honestly was probably just as much work. So if now you feel inspired with your own ideas, or just really want to give me some feedback on my ideas, there's a comment section in this video. And of course, heard that subscribe button works well too. If you're thinking, hey, I want to hang out with this weird person, then I do actually have a Twitch channel. I'm a Twitch streamer, honestly. I'll just do YouTube sometimes. So if you're interested, check out my Twitch channel. And that's all from me. Bye-bye.